Jasmine Crockett sat motionless at the congressional hearing, the bright lights catching the emerald green suit of the freshman Texas congresswoman as she listened to the furious tirade. Across the room, Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General, stood red-faced, her finger pointing directly at Crockett, voice rising to a fever pitch that echoed through the chamber. "You have no right to question my integrity," Bondi shouted, the microphone amplifying her rage as committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. What happened next shocked everyone in the room. Instead of firing back with equal fury, Crockett calmly adjusted her microphone, took a slow sip of water, and delivered a response so measured and devastating that within hours, the video would rack up millions of views and become the defining moment of the entire hearing. Before diving into this incredible showdown, hit the like button and subscribe so you won't miss our breaking political analysis that cuts through the noise. The hearing room buzzed with tension as the C-SPAN cameras panned across the packed chamber. Today's Oversight Committee meeting had drawn unusual attention, with representatives from both parties ready to clash over the controversial federal funding bill. Pam Bondi, the former Florida Attorney General known for her aggressive prosecutorial style, sat confidently at the witness table, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her navy blue blazer creating a commanding presence. The Republicans had called her as their star witness, hoping her testimony would derail the Democrats' agenda. On the committee dais, Jasmine Crockett, the freshman Democrat from Texas, reviewed her notes carefully. At 42, the former civil rights attorney had quickly established herself as a rising star in the party, articulate, sharp, and unafraid to challenge political veterans. Her emerald green suit stood out against the dark wood paneling of the hearing room, her braided hair pulled back in a professional style that framed her focused expression. "The committee will come to order," announced Chairman James Lankford, his gavel echoing through the chamber. "Today we're examining the allocation of federal resources in the proposed infrastructure package." The routine opening statements proceeded predictably until Bondi began her testimony, her voice carrying the confidence of someone accustomed to commanding courtrooms. "This bill is nothing short of fiscal negligence," Bondi declared, looking directly at the Democratic side of the committee. "The earmarks for urban development are bloated handouts designed to reward political allies rather than address actual infrastructure needs." Several Republican members nodded approvingly as she continued, "When I was Attorney General, I prosecuted corrupt schemes with less blatant misappropriation than what I see in this legislation." Camera operators zoomed in on committee members' reactions, Republicans smiling in agreement, Democrats scribbling notes furiously. Chairman Lankford looked pleased as Bondi laid out her case against the bill, methodically criticizing its funding allocations. "The American people deserve transparency, not political theater disguised as infrastructure investment," she concluded, settling back in her chair, with the satisfied look of someone who just delivered a knockout punch. As question time began, senior committee members took their turns. The partisan divide was immediately apparent. Republicans lobbing softball questions, allowing Bondi to expand her criticisms. Democrats attempting to challenge her assertions only to be met with dismissive rebuttals. The tension in the room steadily increased with each exchange, the political theater playing out as expected until Chairman Lankford announced, "The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Crockett, for 5 minutes of questioning." A subtle shift occurred in the room as Crockett leaned toward her microphone. Those familiar with her work in the Texas legislature and her record as a civil rights attorney straightened in their seats, anticipating what might come next. Bondi's expression remained confident but attentive. She'd done her homework and knew Crockett's reputation for precise, penetrating questions that often left witnesses scrambling. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman," Crockett began, her voice measured and professional. "Ms. Bondi, I appreciate your attendance today." She paused, reviewing a document in front of her. "Before we discuss the current bill, I'd like to clarify some statements you made about your experience with federal funding oversight during your time as Florida's Attorney General." Bondi nodded. "Of course, Congresswoman. What happened next would transform a routine committee hearing into a viral moment that would dominate news cycles for days to come." Crockett looked directly at Bondi, her expression neutral but focused. "Ms. Bondi, you stated earlier that you have extensive experience identifying misappropriation of federal funds. Could you elaborate on your handling of the $300,000 in federal pandemic relief that was allocated to Florida's small businesses, but was instead used for an unrelated project in 2021? A momentary flash of surprise crossed Bondi's face before she composed herself. I'm not sure what you're referring to, Congresswoman. I left office in 2019, well before any pandemic relief funds were distributed. I'm aware of your tenure dates, Crockett replied, her voice still calm. I'm referring to the consulting work your firm did for the state after you left office, specifically advising on federal fund allocations during which this particular irregularity occurred. The room grew noticeably quieter as committee members sensed the exchange taking an unexpected turn. Bondi's posture stiffened slightly. My firm provided general compliance guidance. We weren't responsible for specific allocation decisions, Bondi responded, her voice taking on a defensive edge. Crockett nodded, then held up a document. I have here an email from October 2021 in which you personally signed off on the reallocation of those funds from small business relief to the Palmetto Highway project. The same project, coincidentally, where your firm also represented one of the primary contractors. Would you like to revise your previous statement about your involvement? Cameras captured the moment perfectly, Bondi's eyes widening slightly, her jaw tightening as she realized the direction of Crockett's questioning. The committee room fell completely silent. That's a mischaracterization of a complex situation, Bondi replied, her voice rising slightly. Those funds were redirected through proper channels after the small business program was fully satisfied. Crockett remained unruffled. That's interesting, because the Florida Small Business Association filed a formal complaint, stating they received only 60% of their allocated funds before the money was redirected. She held up another document. I have their filing here. Would you care to explain the discrepancy? The questioning continued for another minute, with Crockett methodically presenting evidence contradicting Bondi's earlier testimony. With each exchange, Bondi's responses grew increasingly tense, her normally composed demeanor showing cracks as Crockett refused to back down. Finally, after Crockett presented a particularly damaging document showing potential conflicts of interest in Bondi's consulting work, the former Attorney General's composure shattered completely. Rising halfway from her chair, face flushed with anger, Bondi's voice escalated to a shout that caused feedback in the microphone system. "This is absolutely outrageous," she yelled, pointing her finger directly at Crockett. "You're taking everything out of context to create a political spectacle. You have no right to question my integrity with these cherry-picked documents when you've been in Congress barely a year." The outburst sent shockwaves through the hearing room. Several committee members looked stunned at the breach of decorum. Chairman Lankford reached for his gavel, but before he could intervene, Bondi continued her tirade. "You Democrats always do this. Twist facts, manipulate evidence, all for your political theater. I've served Florida for years while you're just looking for your viral moment. This is disgraceful." Her voice echoed through the chamber, face contorted with rage, fingers still jabbing in Crockett's direction. The contrast couldn't have been more striking, Bondi shouting and gesticulating wildly, while Crockett sat perfectly still, her expression unchanged throughout the outburst. The cameras captured it all, Bondi's loss of control versus Crockett's composed demeanor. As Bondi finally paused to catch her breath, the room went completely silent. All eyes turned to Crockett, waiting for an equally explosive response. Instead, what happened next would become the defining moment of the hearing, the clip that would be shared millions of times across social media platforms and analyzed on every major news network. Calmly, deliberately, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett adjusted her microphone, took a slow sip of water from the glass in front of her, and looked directly at Bondi. The entire room held its breath, waiting. When Crockett finally spoke, her voice was measured, controlled, and devastatingly effective. "Ms. Bondi," she began, the room so quiet you could hear the air conditioning hum, "I didn't come here to question your integrity. Your own emails did that for me." The tension in the hearing room had reached fever pitch. Pam Bondi's furious outburst still hung in the air like electricity, her face flushed with anger as she glared across the space at Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett. The cameras captured every moment of this stark contrast, Bondi's emotional eruption versus Crockett's composed demeanor. Committee members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Chairman Lankford seemed frozen, gavel in hand, unsure whether to intervene. The audience in the gallery remained absolutely silent, many recording the exchange on their phones, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Crockett's calm reply, "I didn't come here to question your integrity. Your own emails did that for me," landed with precision. She continued in the same measured tone, never raising her voice or showing any sign of being rattled by Bondi's outburst. "The American people deserve accountability, Ms. Bondi. Not shouting, not deflection. Just simple accountability." Crockett maintained unwavering eye contact as she spoke. "You've criticized this bill for fiscal irresponsibility, while your own record shows concerning patterns that the public should be aware of." Bondi attempted to interrupt. "You're taking everything out of—" "I haven't finished my time, Ms. Bondi," Crockett stated firmly but without aggression. "And I'd appreciate the same professional courtesy I extended during your testimony." The rebuke was delivered with such calm authority that Bondi fell silent, visibly seething, but unable to find an effective response to Crockett's composure. Crockett turned slightly, addressing the chairman. "Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter these documents into the official record." She handed a folder to a staff member who delivered it to Lankford. "They include the email correspondence I referenced, the formal complaint from the Florida Small Business Association, and financial disclosures showing the connection between Ms. Bondi's consulting firm and the contractors who received the redirected funds." "So ordered," Lankford replied, his tone noticeably subdued. Returning her attention to Bondi, Crockett continued, "Ms. Bondi, I respect your years of public service. Truly, I do. But when you come before this committee making definitive claims about fiscal responsibility and proper oversight, your own record becomes relevant to that testimony." What happened next intensified the drama even further. Crockett picked up another document, this one still unknown to Bondi. "I have here the internal audit from the Florida State Comptroller's Office dated January 2022 that specifically flags the transaction we're discussing as procedurally irregular and recommends further review." She looked up at Bondi. "Were you aware this audit existed?" The color drained from Bondi's face. Her previous rage seemed to collapse into confusion and concern. I haven't seen that document." "That's unfortunate," Crockett replied, her voice still even, "because it was sent to your office for response 3 times between February and April 2022. Each request for comment went unanswered." Cameras captured Bondi's expression, transitioning from anger to something resembling panic. She glanced toward the Republican side of the dais, seemingly searching for assistance, but found only uncomfortable expressions as committee members processed this new information. Crockett wasn't finished. "Ms. Bondi, I'm not here to attack you personally, but when you make statements before Congress about proper allocation of federal funds, while evidence suggests you may have engaged in exactly the kind of behavior you're criticizing, that creates a credibility problem." She paused, allowing the point to sink in across the hearing room. The people of Florida, and indeed all Americans, deserve to know that those entrusted with public funds are using them as intended, not redirecting them to benefit connected contractors, not ignoring official audits questioning those decisions, and certainly not coming before Congress to criticize others, while hoping no one notices this history. Several phones in the gallery were raised high, capturing every word as Crockett methodically dismantled Bondi's credibility without ever raising her voice or showing a hint of the anger Bondi had displayed minutes earlier. The contrast in styles was impossible to miss. Bondi's emotional outburst versus Crockett's factual precision. One relied on volume and intimidation, the other on evidence and composure, and everyone in the room could see which approach was prevailing. "My time is almost up," Crockett noted, glancing at the clock. "So I'll end with this, Ms. Bondi. You mentioned my limited time in Congress, as if it somehow invalidates my questions. But the length of my service isn't what matters here. What matters is that when I ask questions in this chamber, I make sure they're backed by facts and evidence." She arranged her papers neatly before delivering her final point. "Perhaps instead of questioning my experience or shouting about your integrity, you could simply address the documented discrepancies in your testimony. That's all I'm asking for. Straightforward answers to straightforward questions." Crockett looked up at the chairman. "I yield back the remainder of my time." The room remained in stunned silence. Chairman Langford seemed momentarily unsure how to proceed before clearing his throat. The gentlewoman yields back. We'll take a 10-minute recess before continuing. As the gavel came down, the spell broke. The hearing room erupted with noise. Journalists rushing out to file stories, spectators buzzing with animated conversation, staff members huddling with their representatives. At the witness table, Bondi sat motionless, staring at her notes, the fight visibly gone from her posture. Across the room, Crockett gathered her documents calmly, accepting a note from her staff assistant without any outward display of triumph. She had not raised her voice once, had not matched Bondi's emotional display, and had emerged unquestionably victorious in the exchange. Outside the hearing room, journalists were already filing their reports. Remarkable scene in today's hearing. One reporter spoke into her camera. Former Florida AG Pam Bondi lost her composure completely, shouting at Congresswoman Crockett, who responded with what can only be described as ice-cold precision. We're told clips of the exchange are already spreading across social media. Indeed, even before the hearing reconvened, the first clips were being shared and commented on. Calm Crockett was beginning to trend, along with Bondi Meltdown. The political impact of the exchange was just beginning to take shape. But one thing was already clear. In the battle of styles between Bondi's fury and Crockett's composure, the latter had won decisively. The 10-minute recess extended to 20, as committee staff huddled with members, discussing how to proceed after the unexpected confrontation. When the hearing finally resumed, Bondi's demeanor had completely changed. Subdued, careful, and notably less combative when responding to further questions. For her part, Crockett participated in the remainder of the hearing with the same professional demeanor she'd displayed throughout, giving no indication that anything extraordinary had occurred. But everyone in the room knew they had just witnessed a significant political moment, one that would follow both women long after the hearing concluded. Within hours, video clips of the exchange between Pam Bondi and Jasmine Crockett spread across the internet like wildfire. What had begun as a routine congressional hearing had transformed into a viral sensation that captured the nation's attention. Social media platforms were flooded with snippets of the confrontation, each highlighting the dramatic contrast, Bondi's explosive anger versus Crockett's unflappable calm. On Twitter, the hashtags #CalmCrockett and Bondi Meltdown climbed rapidly, reaching the top trending positions by early evening. Short clips focusing on Crockett's most devastating responses garnered millions of views, with users adding captions like, "Watch a masterclass in keeping your cool," and "This is how you handle someone trying to intimidate you." Bondi thought she could steamroll Crockett with volume and anger, tweeted a political commentator with over 2 million followers. Instead, she walked face first into a buzzsaw of facts and receipts. Game over. The post was shared over 50,000 times within hours. Meanwhile, major news networks scrambled to cover the unexpected drama. CNN featured the exchange prominently, with a panel analyzing both the substance of Crockett's questions and the striking difference in demeanor. What we witnessed today was a perfect example of preparation beating emotion, noted a political analyst. Congresswoman Crockett came armed with documents, specific questions, and unshakable composure. Former AG Bondi was clearly caught off guard and reacted emotionally rather than substantively. Fox News took a different angle, with several commentators suggesting Crockett had ambushed Bondi unfairly. These were clearly gotcha questions designed to provoke a reaction, argued one host. However, even conservative analysts had to acknowledge the optics of the exchange. Regardless of the substance, the visuals here are problematic, admitted a Republican strategist. Shouting while your opponent remains calm never plays well with the public. MSNBC ran extended clips of the exchange, with hosts praising Crockett's approach. "This is how oversight is supposed to work," declared one anchor. Specific questions backed by evidence, delivered without personal attacks or grandstanding. The viral moment extended beyond political circles. Entertainment sites posted the clips with headlines like, "Congressional clapback. Watch this freshman rep school a veteran politician without breaking a sweat." Even sports commentators weighed in, with one popular ESPN personality tweeting, Crockett just gave a masterclass in playing the long game. Let your opponent lose their cool while you stick to your game plan. That's championship mentality. By nightfall, late-night comedy shows were already incorporating the exchange into their monologues. Pam Bondi learned a valuable lesson today, joked one host. When you come at the queen, you best not miss, or at least bring an indoor voice. The public reaction was similarly decisive. Comment sections across platforms overwhelmingly favored Crockett's approach, with users from across the political spectrum acknowledging the effectiveness of her measured response to Bondi's outburst. "I don't always agree with Democrats," wrote one commenter identifying as conservative, "but I respect someone who can make their case without screaming. Crockett earned my respect today, regardless of politics." Another user commented, "My daughter wants to be a lawyer, and I'm making her watch this clip. This is how you stand your ground, with facts, evidence, and unshakable composure." As clips continued to circulate, journalists began digging deeper into the substance of Crockett's questions. Several Florida news outlets published stories examining the pandemic relief fund reallocation that Crockett had highlighted, with headlines asking, was Bondi's firm really involved in redirecting small business relief funds? The Jacksonville Times-Union ran a feature confirming many of Crockett's assertions, reporting that internal emails did show Bondi's consulting firm had advised on the fund reallocation, while also representing contractors who benefited from the decision. The paper also verified the existence of the comptroller's audit that Crockett had referenced. By the following morning, the story had evolved from a viral moment to a substantive political story. Morning shows featured the exchange prominently, with hosts noting that beyond the theater of the confrontation, Crockett had raised serious questions about Bondi's past actions that remained largely unanswered. "What makes this different from typical political theater," explained a political scientist on a morning news program, "is that beneath the dramatic confrontation are actual documents, emails, and an official audit that raise legitimate questions about potential conflicts of interest. This isn't just about who kept their cool, it's about accountability." For both women, the exchange had immediate consequences. Crockett's social media following exploded overnight, with her Twitter account gaining over 200,000 new followers in less than 24 hours. Her office reported being flooded with messages of support from across the country, including many from people who identified as independents or moderate Republicans impressed by her professionalism. Progressive organizations quickly capitalized on the moment, with several launching fundraising campaigns featuring the clip and slogans like, "Support representatives who fight with facts, not volume." Crockett's campaign reported a surge in small-dollar donations from all 50 states. For Bondi, the fallout was less positive. Several organizations that had booked her for speaking engagements quietly removed her from their upcoming events. Republican strategists publicly advised other witnesses appearing before congressional committees to learn from Bondi's mistake and maintain composure regardless of questioning. More concerning for Bondi were the investigative stories now emerging about the pandemic fund reallocation. The Tampa Bay Times announced it was launching a full investigation into the matter, while the Florida Small Business Association issued a statement thanking Congresswoman Crockett for bringing to light issues our members have been raising for over a year. Bondi's initial response to the viral moment came via a terse statement released through her spokesperson. Yesterday's hearing was a partisan ambush designed to distract from the serious flaws in the Democrats' spending bill. We stand by Ms. Bondi's record of service to Florida and will address any mischaracterizations of her post-government consulting work at the appropriate time. The statement did little to stem the tide of public reaction, with many commentators noting that it failed to address any of the specific allegations Crockett had raised with documentation. By midday, Bondi had scheduled an appearance on a friendly cable news program, clearly hoping to reset the narrative. But the damage control effort faced an uphill battle against the powerful visual of her shouting, while Crockett remained composed, a contrast that continued to dominate social media and news coverage. For her part, Crockett maintained her measured approach. When asked about the exchange by reporters as she left a committee meeting the following day, she simply stated, "Yesterday's hearing was about ensuring proper oversight of federal funds. That remains my focus, regardless of how witnesses respond to factual questions." The understated response only enhanced her growing reputation for unflappable professionalism. a stark contrast to the emotional outbursts that had come to characterize much of contemporary political discourse. As the story continued to develop, political analysts from across the spectrum agreed on one thing. The exchange between Bondi and Crockett had resonated because it represented something increasingly rare in American politics, a confrontation where facts and composure prevailed over volume and emotion. For millions of Americans weary of shouting matches masquerading as political debate, Crockett's calm dismantling of Bondi's testimony offered something surprisingly refreshing, a reminder that in the arena of public service, how you make your case can matter just as much as what you're arguing for. And as the video views continued to climb, reaching over 50 million across platforms within 48 hours, it became clear that Crockett's composed response to Bondi's shouting had struck a chord that transcended partisan politics, tapping into a widespread hunger for more substantive, fact-based political discourse. The moment had gone beyond viral. It had become a cultural touchstone, referenced in conversations about professionalism, debate tactics, and the changing face of political communication in America. 3 days after the explosive hearing, the aftershocks continued to reverberate through Washington and beyond. What had begun as a routine oversight committee meeting had transformed into a defining political moment with implications far beyond the original subject matter. For Jasmine Crockett, the impact was immediate and substantial. Her office was flooded with interview requests from major publications and networks. Time magazine reached out about featuring her in an upcoming issue on New Voices in Congress. Several talk shows extended invitations, eager to have her discuss not just the confrontation with Bondi, but her broader legislative agenda and background. More significantly, senior Democratic leadership took notice. Sources within the party revealed that Crockett had received calls from several high-ranking Democrats, including committee chairs and party leaders impressed by her effectiveness. Discussions about giving her more prominent committee assignments and speaking roles were reportedly underway. Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated exactly the kind of focused oversight we need, the House Democratic leader told reporters when asked about the viral exchange. She came prepared, stuck to the facts, and didn't get drawn into personal attacks even when provoked. That's the standard we should all aspire to. For Crockett personally, the attention brought both opportunities and challenges. Her staff reported being overwhelmed by the volume of messages and calls, requiring additional personnel to manage the sudden influx. Security around her Capitol Hill office was temporarily increased after a small but concerning number of threatening messages from people angered by her questioning of Bondi. Despite these pressures, Crockett maintained the same measured approach that had characterized her during the hearing. She continued attending committee meetings and floor votes, politely declining most interview requests to focus on her legislative work. The Congresswoman appreciates the interest in last week's hearing, her communications director stated, but believes actions speak louder than television appearances. This restraint only enhanced her growing reputation. Crockett is playing this exactly right, noted a veteran political consultant. She's letting the work speak for itself, rather than trying to capitalize on 15 minutes of fame. That suggests someone thinking about a long-term career in public service, not just viral moments. For Pam Bondi, the aftermath proved more challenging. Despite multiple attempts to reframe the narrative through friendly media appearances, the images of her shouting while Crockett remained composed continued to dominate coverage. More damaging were the investigative stories now examining her consulting work in Florida. The Tampa Bay Times published a detailed investigation confirming many of Crockett's assertions about the Pandemic Relief Fund reallocation. The article revealed that Bondi's firm had indeed advised state officials on redirecting funds initially designated for small businesses to infrastructure projects, including ones involving clients of her firm. Internal emails obtained through public records requests showed Bondi had been personally involved in these discussions, contradicting her testimony before the committee. Following this reporting, 2 organizations announced they were canceling upcoming events featuring Bondi, citing scheduling conflicts but privately acknowledging the controversy. More concerning for Bondi was a statement from the Florida Bar Association, noting they had received ethics complaints regarding potential conflicts of interest in her post-government consulting work. Bondi's allies attempted to mount a defense, arguing she was being unfairly targeted for political reasons. Several conservative commentators suggested the entire episode had been a setup designed to embarrass her and distract from the Democrats' spending bill. "This is classic misdirection," claimed one Fox News host. "They don't want to talk about the billions in wasteful spending, so they attack the messenger." However, these defenses struggled to gain traction against the documented evidence Crockett had presented and the subsequent journalistic investigations confirming those documents' authenticity. Even some conservative outlets acknowledged the substantive issues raised deserved serious consideration beyond partisan positioning. Beyond the immediate political fallout for both women, the incident sparked broader discussions about changing standards in public discourse. Opinion pieces analyzed the Crockett method versus the Bondi approach, with writers across the political spectrum largely favoring the former's evidence-based calm over the latter's emotional appeals. "There's a lesson here for politicians of all stripes," wrote a columnist for The Atlantic. "In an era when everyone has a camera and every outburst can be endlessly replayed, maintaining composure isn't just about decorum, it's strategic. Crockett understood this. Bondi didn't." Psychology experts weighed in as well, noting how Crockett's response represented effective techniques for dealing with confrontation. By remaining calm while her opponent became emotional, Congresswoman Crockett maintained credibility with observers, explained a behavioral psychologist in a widely shared analysis. "It's a technique that works not just in politics, but in any high-stakes negotiation or confrontation." In classrooms across the country, teachers reported using clips from the exchange. In lessons on debate, public speaking, and conflict resolution, a high school debate coach in Michigan told a local newspaper, "I've had my team study this exchange as a perfect example of how preparation and composure trump volume and emotion. It's a masterclass in effective persuasion." Law professors similarly incorporated the clips into their courses. "I'm using this in my trial advocacy class to demonstrate how to respond when opposing counsel attempts to rattle you," noted a professor at Georgetown Law. Crockett's technique of pausing, taking a sip of water, and responding factually, rather than emotionally, is exactly what we try to teach future litigators. By the end of the week, the hearing had generated something rare in contemporary politics: a nearly unanimous consensus about effective communication. Polls showed that regardless of political affiliation, Americans overwhelmingly viewed Crockett's approach more favorably than Bondi's, with 76% of respondents saying they were more likely to trust someone who remains calm under pressure than someone who shows passionate emotion. For Crockett, this translated into tangible political capital. Her fundraising numbers for the quarter jumped significantly, with small-dollar donations flowing in from across the country. More importantly, her colleagues in Congress began seeking her input on messaging strategies and committee approaches. "There's a before and after to Jasmine Crockett's career," observed a senior Democratic strategist. "Before this hearing, she was a promising freshman finding her footing. After it, she's a communications powerhouse who's demonstrated she can be devastatingly effective without resorting to the kind of theatrics that turn off moderate voters." For Bondi, the consensus was equally clear, but far less positive. Republican strategists privately acknowledged her approach had backfired dramatically, creating not just a personal embarrassment, but potentially damaging the party's broader messaging on government spending and accountability. "The problem isn't just that she lost her cool," explained a Republican consultant speaking on condition of anonymity. "It's that she created a perfect visual metaphor for everything people dislike about political discourse: shouting, finger-pointing, and personal attacks instead of substantive engagement with the issues." As the immediate furor began to fade, the longer-term impact of the exchange came into focus. Beyond the personal consequences for both women, the incident had provided a rare point of consensus in America's divided political landscape: a shared recognition that facts delivered calmly ultimately carry more weight than emotion delivered loudly. In a political environment often characterized by its heat rather than its light, this simple lesson resonated across partisan lines. And while the specific policy issues debated in that hearing room would eventually fade from public memory, the image of Crockett's composed response to Bondi's outburst would remain, a powerful reminder that how we engage matters just as much as what we're fighting for. 2 weeks after the hearing that transformed both their public images, Jasmine Crockett and Pam Bondi were experiencing dramatically different trajectories in their professional lives. For Crockett, the viral moment had translated into substantial political capital. Democratic leadership had appointed her to a special task force on government accountability. a high-profile assignment rarely given to first-term representatives. Her office reported that senior members of Congress who had previously barely acknowledged her now regularly sought her input on messaging and strategy. What Congresswoman Crockett demonstrated wasn't just good optics, it was effective oversight, noted the House Majority Leader during a press conference. She showed how proper preparation and a focus on facts rather than theatrics can cut through noise and get to truth. Crockett had leveraged her newfound prominence strategically, focusing on